Before I could put the chassis, interior, and engine all together with the body, there were still a couple of parts that needed to be painted. So I first primed them, then painted them black, and afterwards clear coated them. Also painted a couple of parts on the body black. After masking the body off, I added some gloss black side skirts as the actual car has, and I also painted the engine bay parts in a matte black. I did a quick test fit before painting all of the clear parts. They were a tiny bit too big after all the paint buildup, so I just sanded all the sides down a tiny amount and then just masked them all off, cut them along the lines on the clear parts themselves, and started painting the black by hand with a brush and some bellow flat black paint. After painting the second layer of black, I just let it sit and dry for a couple of hours before removing the masking tape and then masking it up again before I could add some tints to the rear sides with some smoke from Tamiya just thinned down and poured in the airbrush. I applied a couple of thin coats, letting them dry in between and also heating them up a tiny amount with a hairdryer. While the clear parts were now drying, I moved on to assembling some of the pre-finished and detailed parts from the earlier videos, and those could all be glued in with some Bob Smith Industries Maxi Cure. With the interior in place, I snapped the back two pieces in as well, added some glue, glued the engine to the chassis, and then glued that assembly all into the body as well with just a small amount of glue on the front and rear bumper. Since I'm not using the standard wheel mounts, or at least not the entire assembly, I had to fill in a couple of small holes in the disc brake assembly that was left, so I just punched a couple of holes in some plastic sheet and just glued that piece into the disc that was remaining, and then used the standard hub along with the USCP wheel and some disc brakes and calipers from Scale Production. They fit on correctly right away. They were just a bit too wide to my taste, so I just sanded off a small amount and then glued it all together, making sure that the offset was correct, the wheels were aligned with the disc brakes in the correct position, and I also had it set at the correct ride height that I desired. Just a small side note, these disc brakes or the holders that I'm using from the kit were not modified in any way to fit these disc brakes. They just fit on tightly with a bit of pressure added and then also just some glue, and then the entire assembly could be glued into the wheel, and then the wheel of course could be glued onto the assembly that was already on the chassis. And then I needed to set the correct ride height. I wasn't really going to go too low, as I don't really think that car looks really good all that low. And I also needed to keep into consideration that the caliper was pointing in the right direction, so I carefully looked at some reference material for this. With the clear parts all nice and dry, I just glued them in place with some Bob Smith Industries Super Gold Plus. After gluing all these clear parts in, I still needed to paint the window trim on the side in gloss black. So I masked it all off with some KIP tape and then carefully cut it all out, masked the surrounding areas, and then moved it to my spray booth to paint it with some gloss black from Vallejo. This is acrylic paint, so it shouldn't really hurt the clear parts and is easy to remove if it does go wrong. In this case it went perfectly fine, so I just went on and applied a couple of light coats. After applying the paint and letting it dry for a bit during the unmasking, I noticed that the tape was pulling the paint off a tiny amount on the edges, so just to be sure I took out a sharp knife and cut along the masking edge and removed the masking tape afterwards. It went perfectly fine and the edges were nice and sharp. With that all said and done, I just moved on to applying some more parts with some more glue. I sometimes get some questions about why I add the black marker around the tail end, in this case also the headlights. Well, it's pretty obvious. The right one was painted and the left one was stock. It doesn't really look all that good, and in my opinion it makes a really big difference. So as usual, I just take out my permanent black marker, mark the edge and glue it in place. The taillights for this car have a pretty detailed and also hard to paint color scheme on it, so luckily the markers made it really easy with all the raised edges to just paint the red red, and then from the inside you can easily paint it with some smoke to darken it and tint it a bit more. The center parts were painted with a black marker, and that was all there was needed to be done to these parts. The backing, or so-called bucket for the taillights, was painted with a silver to give a nice bright reflective surface. I also added some Tamiya clear smoke paint on the inside to give them a bit of a tint to make them look a bit more like the actual ones on the 1-to-1 cars. Some hobby designed 3D Porsche emblems were placed on the hood and also on the wheels. After placing them, I carefully centered them and then put them into place permanently. I also placed a couple of decals here and there, and that pretty much finished up all the detailing on this build. And with that final bit of finagling on the decal for the caliper, this one was finished and it's time to move on to the next one. Be sure to head over to the USCP site for the wheels if you so want to do these on your build as well. And also don't forget to check out my website, the Scale Modeler, for a lot of these accessories, tools and stuff used in the videos, and also the links in the description.